I have been working in this area of discipline now for about 25 years, and my interest really started when I don't know, I had a number of personal experiences in my life that really made me think about physical punishment and what it's all about and why we do it and how it's affected us and how people in other places think about it. Like when I learned about that Swedish corporal punishment ban, it just kind of blew my mind because I thought, we weren't even talking about it here at that time. That was 1979. And so I just was so curious about how people think there. So I started going to Sweden and kind of seeing things from a different perspective, and it really enriched, I guess, my view of what a society can be in terms of investing in its children and investing in parents and really respecting the parenting role and really meaning it when they say families are important. We often think of discipline as kind of taking things away and positive discipline as giving something, but always with this idea of external controls. And really a lot of our ways of parenting and socializing children have been from that point of view of punishments and rewards. And what I really wanted to do with this program was to move beyond that, because as was mentioned, the organization that I worked with to develop this is a child rights organization. What that means, that's a whole other idea. Sometimes you hear children's rights, and you think, yikes, they're gonna take over the world. That's not what it means at all. What it means is thinking about children as people. So if we think about children as people in their own right, you start to think a little bit differently about the reward and punishment thing. And I hope that this will become clearer by the time I finish talking tonight, that you'll see the difference between discipline through rewards and punishments and discipline through guidance and not a use of external controls on children. So maybe the first thing I'll do is just explain what positive discipline is not and what it is in a general way. So one thing it is not is indulgence or permissiveness. It's not about letting children do whatever they want. Children need to learn. They are learners. They come into this world knowing nothing about the rules of the game, right? They need us to guide them, socialize them. And it's not about not having rules. It's about giving children boundaries and limits and all those things that we know that they need in order to understand. But it's also not about quick reactions to situations. And many times we'll talk about this more in a few minutes, but many times we get caught up in the day-to-day little frustrations, little conflicts, and we react quickly to them. And that really, we end up just kind of spinning our wheels. And that's one of the things that we want to help parents move beyond. But positive discipline is also not about punishments other than hitting and spanking and threatening and yelling and those kinds of things. Often when parents ask, well, what's the alternative? They're really saying, what's the punishment that's okay with you? What can I do to punish the child? And what we really want to do is help parents think in a different way about that whole punishment thing. And as I said, I've come to this through research on physical punishment, and what we know about punishment is that it really, it has a lot of side effects, and it can really affect the relationship between the parent and the child over time. It can really start to erode the child's sense of security and control over their own situation. So we know that punishment is not the ideal teaching tool. We've known that since the 1960s. We've known that it comes with a lot of negative side effects. So how do we help parents deal with those frustrations that I'm sure all of you who are parents out there have experienced probably today in a way that isn't punitive, that actually builds the relationship? Well, what we're trying to do is help parents learn how to help their children develop their own self-control gradually. That's a gradual development that's very much tied to the child's brain development. And so we help parents understand that process so that they can help the child learn how to develop their own self-control. It's about clear communication. Sometimes children get into difficulty because they really haven't understood. And so we help parents become more aware of their own communication with their children and to optimize that. It's also about seeing the child as worthy of our respect. And this is something that can be difficult to get our heads around in our society. We have a society that really isn't built on that kind of idea. It's built on the idea that children, sometimes they're even to be feared, or that they're something you kind of have to live through, the terrible twos and the, surviving this whole thing. And instead, really, what we want to be doing is seeing this child as a person in their own right who is worthy of our respect. And when we treat them with respect, what tends to happen is that they respect us in turn. So how do you do this when you're angry and frustrated, is the question, right? We'll get there. Positive discipline is also about helping children learn how to make good decisions on their own. If we rely on rewards and punishments, then when those rewards and punishments aren't there, the child hasn't necessarily built their own inner controls. So what we want to do is help them understand more and not just respond to rewards and punishments, but to truly understand and take in our values and our reasons so that when they're on their own, they can make good decisions without us. Just since I've arrived here, I've met several people whose children were moving away to university, and they were so afraid and so worried and concerned, and it's a difficult transition. And they're scared because they're no longer there to monitor and support and help and advise. So what we want to do is to be building all the time from birth forward. You've only got 16 or 17 years to get that child ready, and then when they leave, to be able to feel confident that they've got what they need to make their own decisions, and they don't rely on people giving them things or taking things away to tell them what's right and wrong. Positive discipline also is really about building children's skills, building their competencies, their abilities to do things well, and their confidence in themselves. And it's about teaching children respect for other people's feelings. And the way that we do that is by making that a very conscious part of the way we interact with them, by respecting their feelings, showing them how that's done, modeling that, and they will see how to treat other people. So how do we do all this? Because it's one thing to say it and another thing to do it, eh? One thing that I found when I'm a parent, by the way. I have a 17-year-old son. And when I would read parenting books, I'd find them helpful, and I'd get insights, and I'd get help, but I couldn't get a kind of a mental map. It didn't hang together. It was like little examples and things, and I really wanted to create some kind of framework that parents could remember easily, that could become their guiding principles, so that when they're in that state of, they can think their way through it. So the way I thought about this was that it's kind of like analogous to building a house. So just think with me for a few minutes about what's involved in building a house successfully. When you're going to build a house, it's a complicated thing. It's a great big thing. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to have all kinds of details and complications involved in it, right? You're never going to get anywhere if you don't know where you're going, if you don't have a vision of how this thing's going to look at the end. What do you want to build? And when you have a plan, the first thing you do, can you imagine just starting to dig a hole and getting a hammer and nails and some wood and hammering things together? You just wouldn't do that, right? You have a blueprint and you think it through and you know where you want to end up. And then you need to have the right tools to do that, right? If you only have a hammer, you're not going to be as successful as if you have a variety of tools and you know how they work and you're skilled in using them. You also need to know what materials you're working with. So if you're building a house out of bricks, you're going to do that in a very different way than if you're building a house out of glass. So you need to know your materials and how they react and how they respond to the way you interact with them. And then finally, anyone who's ever done a reno knows or has watched that guy, that guy on TV, watches HGTV, knows that it doesn't always go smoothly, right? There's no such thing. It just doesn't happen. That's unrealistic. So even if you've got a great plan and you know where you're heading and you've got good tools and you know what you're doing, there are going to be things that don't go according to what you expect. So there are going to be frustrations. And you have choices in those moments of frustration of either walking away and just saying, forget it, or sitting down and pounding the ground and crying, or throwing something and breaking it all to bits, or saying, okay, we've got a problem, so how can we figure this out? And generally, that last option is the one that's going to get you to your end point, right? So this is the way I've thought about this whole discipline situation. We need to have a plan, and that is our long-term goals. And I'm going to talk more about this in a minute, so I won't spend time on this at this very moment. Then we need the right tools. And what we know from all of the parenting literature, and boy, there's a lot of research on parenting, and what we know from all of the research on parenting, when you boil it down to its simplest form, is that children need, in order to develop in a healthy way, get along well with their peers, succeed academically, have good relationships with their parents, and all those things, they need warmth and structure in balance. And I'll be talking about each of these in more detail shortly. But we also need to know what materials we're working with, because I'm sure every one of you out there is going to tell me they're all different. And they're different at different ages. So they change as they grow, and they're all individuals too. So we need to understand them. We need to understand how they learn and how they develop. And that means understanding how children think and feel. And so in our program, we go into depth in child development from birth through adolescence. We won't be able to do that tonight, but I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the kinds of important themes. And of course, we are humans, and we are not robots. And so we have challenges, and we have frustrations, and we have obstacles, and we have bad moods, and we have hunger, and we have stress, and we have all kinds of things that can go differently than what we expect. So in those moments, what we need is probably not to have a tantrum and cry or throw things or scream or hurt anybody, but to say, okay, we got a problem. How are we going to figure this out? So what we're doing is we're helping parents learn how to become problem solvers as opposed to punishers. If we understand better what's actually going on in that moment, then we have a much better chance at responding in a constructive way.